So recently I've been playing vanilla WoW and I felt like making this countdown video. In this countdown I'll be going over 5 of the most ridiculous bugs and exploits in vanilla WoW. Number 5. Wall jumping. Wall jumping was a nifty little feature when it was first discovered in the early days of vanilla WoW. At first it was mostly harmless, people would use it to get to fun places like on top of the Goldshire Inn, which you previously couldn't get to. However, some people took it further to explore parts of Azeroth that no one had ever seen before. This opened up a whole new world to explore. One example of this was wall jumping into Hyjal, which was an off-limits zone until Blizzard implemented it during Cataclysm. You were also able to access the Caverns of Time this way. This was able to give players a sneak peek into the Burning Crusades before it was even released. Not only was wall jumping used to explore hidden areas, but it was also used to gain unfair advantages against other players. A prime example of this was getting on top of Orgrimmar as an alliance character to usually an unreachable place and killing unsuspecting Horde characters. Wall jumpers weren't usually punished as the issue was so widespread and mostly harmless. However, Blizzard did whip out their banhammer for people that took it too far. Number 4. Baron Gedon Bomb. Baron Gedon is the 5th boss in World of Warcraft's first major multi-instance raid, the Molten Core. The boss was just like most bosses of its time. It had few mechanics and abilities, and the abilities that it did have were nothing special. However, the interesting part starts with its Living Bomb ability. The boss was able to apply Living Bomb to both players and pets and would explode after 10 seconds. If you were unlucky enough to be the target of this ability, you would take 3,200 damage to yourself and all nearby other players and blast you straight up in the air. The exploiting starts when someone, either by accident or on purpose, discovered that if Living Bomb was applied to their pet and then proceeded to unsummon it, the pet would still retain the debuff until the next time the player summoned their pet. At that point, the debuff would count down until the 10 seconds were up and explode. This somehow even worked outside of the raid instance. The next obvious step was to summon your pet with the debuff in a highly populated area like an auction house and watch as all your fellow players exploded to their deaths. Number 3. AQ40 Disappearing Platforms. AQ40 was the first ever raid which allowed you to use your mount and even had mounts specifically designed to be used in that instance. When Naxxramas was introduced in patch 1.1, the only boss that dropped effective gear in AQ was the last boss Cthulhu. Since AQ was so big, it could take you up to 20 minutes to ride all the way from the first boss to the last. Not to mention you had to clear several bosses and a hell of a lot of trash, which in itself was difficult to begin with. And remember, this is vanilla. Some bosses had extremely annoying mechanics which required very specific classes, specs and gear to kill. Not only that, but you had the issue of managing 40 people. If you didn't have a stable guild with a good raid leader, people would leave or simply not do their job properly, which could cause so much drama and frustration. Because of all of this, people were extremely desperate to find new ways to get to Cthulhu, which also happened to be just underneath the first boss. Usually exploiting doesn't go further than messing around with the game mechanics, but in this case a US guild called Overrated took exploiting to a whole new level. They somehow figured out that you can mess with the game files to remove the platform separating the first boss from Cthulhu. This time Blizzard was merciless with their punishment and gave every single raid member a permanent ban. Number 2. Reckoning Bomb. Reckoning was an ability that paladins could pick up in the protection tree. What it did was give you an additional auto attack every time you took a critical strike. Also, for a time it didn't have a limit on how many charges of Reckoning you could get. This means that you could potentially one-shot a player if you were lucky enough. Some paladins wanted to abuse this mechanic to gain an unfair advantage. Back in vanilla, if you sit down, all attacks against you would be guaranteed crits. This meant that you could sit down during a fight, let the enemy player or mob hit you a few times, stand up and one-shot them with multiple auto attacks and Seal of Command procs. Things started becoming ridiculous when one paladin was able to stack enough Reckoning procs to single-handedly take down Doomlord Kazakh, which was a 40-man world boss. After a video was released of Kazakh being one-shot, Blizzard quickly served out a hotfix by giving Reckoning a 5 charge limit. It was still quite overpowered, and Blizzard eventually nerfed it by giving it a 10% chance on hit to gain a stack in Reckoning, down from 100%. Number 1. Hakka Blood Plague. This bug was so extreme it not only hit the World of Warcraft community by surprise, but the gaming industry as a whole. The incident happened on September the 13th of 2005. It was a virtual epidemic most famously known as the Corrupted Blood incident. With the introduction of Zul'Gurub in patch 1.7, the last boss Hakka the Soulflayer had an ability called Corrupted Blood. This debuff dealt 875 to 1125 damage and another 200 damage every second to the target and all nearby enemies for 10 seconds. This was generally a cool mechanic. Your group had to spread out to avoid spreading the debuff to other players. The disease would eventually go away after 10 seconds or when the infected character died. Things took a turn for the worse when the disease made it into the outside world by way of hunter pets that contracted the disease. Hunters would dismiss their pet with the debuff and summon it in a capital city in the same way the Baron Gedon Living Bomb was able to leave the Molten Core. As you would expect, the disease quickly spread across Azeroth, infecting city after city. The worst part was that non-player characters like guards were asymptomatic carriers of the disease. This meant that the disease wouldn't die out after players died. All infected NPCs would carry the disease and continue spreading it to players. Within hours, Corrupted Blood had infected entire cities such as Ironforge and Orgrimmar because of their high player concentrations. Low-level players were killed in seconds by the high-damaging disease. For days, carpets of skeletons riddled the highest population towns and were rendered uninhabitable by the persistent plague. This virtual epidemic got so bad that it even caught the attention of epidemic researchers who studied it and compared it to a real-life epidemic scenario. Thank you for watching this countdown video. Like and favorite if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this from me in the future. Until next time guys, bye!